Now, today's guest disruptor is Paulina Sygulska, serial entrepreneur, seed investor, and a government funding expert with respect to R&D, tax credits, Innovate UK, Horizon 2020. We'll hear a little bit more about that later. So before I talk to Paulina, really delighted to have everybody join and to see that lots of new and existing members and partners of our community tuning in each week. As you know at Nimbus, but just in case for those of you who are newer to the community, we want to connect you. We know that we attract a forward-thinking group of people, business and technology leaders who are looking to fuel innovation and inspire change. And at the moment, change is absolutely all around us and here to stay. So what we want to do this morning and every morning at Chief Disruptor Breakfast Club is to expand the mind and deliver some insight with your coffee to power up your grey matter and inspire you with some ideas as teams and organisations adapt to different ways of working. So I'm going to interview Paulina in just a second, but as ever, please submit some questions as and when they come to you. There's a special Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and I will ask Paulina as many of those as I can. Fantastic. So Paulina, I'm absolutely delighted to speak to you. We spoke, I think, a couple of years ago, where I learned about Grantry, the company which you founded. So Paulina Sygulska is a workplace innovator. You're a regular speaker on open culture, a seed investor, and you're actually also about to launch a book early next year, which we'll hear about towards the end. Welcome to you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the show. Thank you so much for having me.
Fantastic. So let's sort of start with Grantry, the company that you founded, because I had never heard of a company operating in this way. And Grantry has a unique workplace philosophy in that it operates a holacracy, which I think some people will be familiar with and others less so. Paulina, maybe you could tell us just a little bit about that and kind of what led you to operate in this way, to set the scene a bit for us, if you will.
Yes, of course. So the reason why Daniel and I, my co-founder and I, established a company such as Grantry with holacracy, with transparent financials, with self-set pay, so people actually set their own pay in our company, was that we really didn't want to recreate the kind of workplaces that we left before starting Grantry. And we wanted to establish the kind of culture which is empowering for everyone and have the kind of company where we would want to work if we are looking for a job today. And holacracy is an operational and governance system which is alternative to hierarchy. And what it does, it introduces hierarchy of work or roles, as opposed to hierarchy of people. So it makes managing work easier, and it kind of divorces that from the hierarchy of people. So everybody is equal and people can change and shift and move roles, and I can have a senior role in one project and a very junior role in another project, and that can shift and change depending on the needs. And the reason why it works well for us is that it minimizes politics and empower people to change virtually anything that stands in the way of them doing a great job. So anyone can initiate a change in governance if there's something connected to the job they're doing that doesn't quite work for them. And that makes us really nimble and really agile. Also during times like this, it really matters.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks very much for that. So I guess some people will be thinking, that sounds fantastic. You know, it's what an ideal. But I guess there are challenges with operating in that way. And I know when we spoke a couple of years ago, you'd really been through a big learning process. We'll dig into that actually in a second. I want to turn to the subject just first of all though of remote working, because that is what a lot of people are discussing at the moment. And it's very natural in the environment in which you operate and that you have described. It's quite natural to a lot of your team. It's very much appreciated by some people, maybe less so others. Just bringing us sort of into the present, what's been the impact of kind of the enforced physical distancing, do you think, on your teams at Grantry?
Well, it's inevitable, I think, that teams will be impacted by enforced distancing unless they're quite used to working remotely, which our teams actually are, especially the grants team. So we've got the tax credits team and the grants team. The grants team works fully remotely. And if to deal with that impact, I think it all boils down to helping people cope with little social life and other pressures on mental health and well-being that they experience. And what we've done during the lockdown, we introduced the buddy system where people regularly check in with each other. We have something that we've called the office natter sessions, one in the morning at 11 and one in the afternoon at 3. And that's for people just to connect, or even to work, having that office noise in the background, just to work in a bit of a friendlier environment. And we also have something that we've called the coping circle for those who are challenged by the circumstances and just want to discuss it and want to reach out to others and have a little bit of help. So what we've done, we've kind of boosted the social life in our remote office in quite a few ways. And I think that remedies a little bit the way people are impacted by enforced physical distancing.
Yeah, and I think that is, as you've mentioned, it's so different for different people. You know, even during sort of times of normal operation, and it sounds like you sort of come up with some good initiatives there. So to sort of give people that space and that time to kind of step away, I think, from the screen. I guess the focus of this series is about innovation, because people work remotely, and you've written this yourself often, let's say in previous times, to kind of bosh through stuff, I think, to sort of coin a phrase, that they want to get stuff done. And we've had kind of feedback that working conditions at the moment is great for project management, you know, and kind of getting stuff done and being sort of productive, certainly productive in the short term, yet not so much for innovation. What do you think are some of the remedies to that? I mean, and would you agree with that premise, I guess?
Not necessarily. So first of all, I don't think it's really necessarily bad for innovation to work from home, since a bit of change of scenery boosts creativity. But it's obviously not the case when the scenery of your home office remains the same for a few months at a time. So what I would really recommend would be to mix things up a little bit. So create a good blend of work and life by going on the lunchtime walk, for example, consuming inspiring content when you need a break from work. Even having a conversation with your family member can help you mix things up a little bit. So checking calls to exchange ideas with colleagues are great. So working from home can be quite fun and creative, as long as you plan your day in such a way to make it a little bit varied and interesting.
And yeah, and I think absolutely, I think some people are certainly, perhaps now after a few months of doing so starting to kind of vary, much more so than at the beginning, and now perhaps the novelty's worn off. Just to go back to how Grantry operates and the open culture there, and because you mentioned that anybody can initiate change, and actually, whilst you were doing your introduction, we had a comment come through that sort of said, wow, you know, and how might this work in other sectors? Again, we'll come back to that later. So in an environment where anybody can initiate change, do you think that that actually the way that Grantry operates has lent itself really well to the current situation, that it's made you adaptable, and have you seen any kind of impact on innovation at all over the past sort of couple of weeks?
I would say that it really makes you very agile, an environment where people can initiate change. This is actually related to their role. So the change they're initiating must be related to what they do. So to prevent a situation where somebody changes something, where, you know, if we were to work together, you and I, where I change something that affects you, it's not my place. So I can only initiate change where it impacts the work that I do. And I would say that it made us more disaster proof and pandemic proof operating in that way, because things can change very quickly and adapt quickly depending on what is needed, as opposed to if we were a hierarchical company, someone at the top, a CEO, for example, making a decision and that very slowly trickling down to the bottom of the org chart. I think it just makes us that much more adaptable.
Yeah, absolutely. And agility is something that I think so many organizations are striving for. And as you say, the last few months have exposed all sorts of weaknesses in resilience, in processes, and that, you know, that actually hopefully will help people and help companies, I think, hopefully emerge stronger and make some improvements. You've talked a bit about empowerment, and explained how that works in practice, which is fantastic, because it's a word that's really easy to use, but at Grantry you've got specific ways of bringing that to life and realizing it. Another thing that you've written about is Douglas McGregor's Theory X and Theory Y. So now, do you think that the pandemic will fundamentally change working habits and sort of drive more Theory Y management? And perhaps you could sort of give a bit of background as to what those things are.
Yeah, of course. So just to repeat for those listeners who aren't familiar with the concept, Theory X of managing people by Douglas McGregor states that people are fundamentally not worthy of trust, and they need to be managed into performing. They need to be sometimes even threatened into performing well. And Theory Y says that people are capable other adults, and they are essentially wired to do a good job. And the interesting concept is that whichever theory you believe in, you will find plenty of evidence in the workplace that is so, that's the objective reality. And my hope is that getting used to remote working will help many companies develop more trust in their people, and essentially put Theory Y into practice. And my hope is also that because trust increases with remote working, practices like micromanagement, which are fundamentally rooted in lack of trust, will decrease in many companies. And it's also my hope that many people will experience being treated like competent adults in their workplaces, which is what Theory Y is all about. So obviously it all depends on the company, it all depends on the culture, but I think remote working forces all the companies really to rethink how they treat their employees and whether or not they put trust in them and believe they're capable people to do the job they've been hired to do.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think how much it is forced and how willingly it's done is going to be really interesting. And I certainly think there's been some surprises along the way for many companies so far.
Yeah.
Just thinking about the office, we were talking before we came online about, you know, whether you missed your office or you know, or at all, and what will the concept of what the office is for change significantly, do you think? I mean, we're already understanding that very large organizations are in no hurry to force people back to work. So what does that mean for the office, I suppose?
I think it's definitely possible that, having discovered the benefits of remote working, many companies won't have offices similar to those from pre-pandemic days. That's true for us. Actually, our lease on our office is expiring at the end of July, and we have decided to have some desks in a managed office for those people who prefer to work from the office, but we won't have an office like we used to have. It just doesn't make any sense, given that a vast majority of people prefers to work remotely. And for us, an office is there to bring us together, help develop a better culture because of physical closeness. So that's, I think, what offices will be more useful for going forward. We have quite a lot of social activities like Friday quiz on a Friday afternoon, for example, and a lot of them can be done remotely, but let's face it, going to the pub or celebrating somebody's birthday is definitely better done offline. So I think offices will remain useful for culture building activities, for things like seeing your clients face to face, obviously, and for things like integrating new joiners into your team. But all in all, developing and sustaining culture will remain the top reasons to have an office in post-pandemic days, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting, and very interesting on the new joiners point, because I think there are certainly plenty of people that have started new jobs in a lockdown period, so very unusual conditions, and so trying to understand how to get people off to the best start, and the role of an office in that, which reflects the culture, as you say. There's some really interesting points there. We have got some questions coming through already, which is fantastic, and I thought that we would. If anybody else sort of listening to Paulina here, who, Grantry is a unique organization in the way that it operates, and Paulina's got some really interesting experience in kind of building an open culture organization. The questions will come to in just 1 second, but before we do, what advice would you give to other leaders to support their teams during these difficult times?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So first and foremost, I would say what's crucial is to help your people look after their mental health. And this includes several things. This includes boosting social life in your remote office so people connect, so people feel less lonely and disconnected. So we talked about earlier about introducing a buddy system, for example. It includes spotting early signs of a mental health crisis coming that one of your employees might experience, and remedying that. And it includes building a culture of openness where mental health isn't taboo, but where people feel free to check in about how they're coping in the times of lockdown. So that's the mental health aspect of things. On top of that, the advice that I would give would be to encourage flexible working. And what I mean by that is for your people to have a good work-life blend where they are able to take a break, do some life management stuff when they need to, maybe spend a little bit of time with their family, and they are free to shift their working hours how they need to make the most of the lockdown period, which can be quite good, for example, for bonding with family members and for, looking after your children. We have several working parents in our company where it's really important for them to be able to look after the kids and work at the same time. So it's really important that they have this freedom and this opportunity to shift things around as and when they need to. And finally, I would recommend what we spoke about when we mentioned theory X and theory Y, to trust people to manage their time and energy and to be competent adults, to just trust them that they're fundamentally wired to do a good job and inspire them instead of threatening them into good performance.
That's excellent advice. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I certainly think that if some of that can be done, then innovation won't, and sort of the creativity that perhaps teams are struggling to kind of implement and struggling to drive at the moment will, it will give them the space to do that, as you say, sort of giving space away from, and the flexibility to sort of to shift working patterns. So thank you very much for that. We do have quite a few questions that have come through, as I said, and so if anybody listening has, I'm sure, thought of a few more. I'm going to start because I think actually this was the first question I asked you when we talked a couple of years ago, and this is a question from Chima, which is, when employees are invited to choose their salaries, how does the company control cash flow to ensure profitability? Because quite rightly, no company can be in business if it is not profitable. So how did that work? Did you have to go through a couple of iterations with how that aspect of open culture worked?
Yes, very good question. So it is obviously a very challenging and innovative practice to have self-set salaries. What we do is people have access to all the company information, and they receive plenty of feedback as they go through their evaluation of their own performance and of their own salary. So if they were to choose a salary that's not in line with how the company is doing, they will receive plenty of feedback during the time where they're doing their consulting process. So, and then if they were to implement that salary, they would be up against essentially everybody else, because the salaries are transparent, and they would be in conflict with so many people in the organization if they were to implement a salary that's not in line with how the company is performing. So we empower people to really make use of the financial transparency, and we have on occasion implemented a policy that this quarter, let's say, our expenses are quite high, and we essentially ask people to wait with their reevaluation of their salaries until the next quarter. So we can implement measures like that, but we prefer not to. We prefer empowering people to make a decision using the company information that they have access to.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And I guess what you're describing sounds like a very adult conversation.
Yeah.
And you've talked about the sort of the parent-child relationship that develops in working environments with surprising regularity. Does that ever actually develop at Grantry, or is the open culture, does that really filter it out? Or if you see it developing, can you do something about it, I suppose?
Do you mean the parent-child relationship?
Yeah, sort of echoes of that just sometimes kind of do occur in organisations. I can't imagine it occurring in Grantry, but maybe it does sometimes.
Yeah, so we'd like to think of our team members as partners. So having a partner adult-to-adult conversation as opposed to parent-to-child. Because I think having parent-to-child conversations with people just sets the expectation that they will be less responsible for themselves and less mindful of the bigger picture. Whereas if you have a partner-to-partner conversation, that kind of shifts everything. And people suddenly, the responsibility for protecting the company is also on them, and they feel it and they know it. So I think shifting that conversation from parent-to-child to partner-to-partner is absolutely crucial if you are to implement some radical policies like open pay and self-set pay.
We had a comment come through really early, actually, once you described how open culture worked and sort of what holacracy was. And this was actually from Nick, who said, wow, how could this work in the public sector, which is in an area that you're expert in. So what do you make of that?
How could
open culture and holacracy work in the public sector?
I think it could. I think it's just all a matter of implementing smaller changes first and setting the ground for being able to implement things like holacracy or transparent financials. I think it's a matter of putting in small changes first and preparing the ground for it. So if you were on day one decide that you're going to have an open culture company, and on day two implement self-set pay, I think the company wouldn't be ready for that. And we also went in our own development. We are a 9-year-old company through a time where we wanted to implement open pay, but culturally we weren't ready for it. So people weren't, for example, ready to take enough responsibility for setting their own pay and for really making that work with where our company is financially speaking. So I would say small steps and making sure that the backbone of culture is ready to sustain those practices and make them work.
Yeah, absolutely. Because as you say, then whatever processes are in place, if that philosophy kind of isn't there and these and isn't being lived, I can see that will create some interesting tensions.
Yes. And also I would say in the public sector, it might make sense to implement it across one team, for example, or one department to start with. So experimenting, I've heard of quite a few big corporates that implemented such drastic changes in 1 or 2 small teams to begin with. So that might be a good idea also.
Thank you. We're going to just move on because we've got a couple of other questions. So this is from Kay Goch, who has asked about IT essentially. So in IT, or a soft business environment, let's say, remote working is possible. But how do you see remote or distributed working being implemented for projects which are more hands-on? And there's examples here such as manufacturing, R&D, where innovation is really essential, and I guess that sort of prototyping side of things, or jobs that need physical devices. I mean, what is remote working really even possible there? What's your view?
That's a good question. I think that it's more difficult to implement, that's for sure, and perhaps there will be periods of time during the project development of a project where you really need that hands-on physical presence of people, and if so, then that is that. But perhaps you don't need all of them in the office at the same time. Perhaps it could be a sort of rotation of people, of having half of your team in the office for a given period of time and then the other half. I think that certainly with most projects, there will be elements to a project that can be done remotely. So we used to think that answering the phones in the office was somebody really needed to be there. And obviously we couldn't be more wrong, because there are a lot of systems which allows us to reroute calls and to answer them from wherever our people are working. So there are a lot of technology solutions, innovative solutions, which empower people to work remotely. So it's a good idea to look at those. But let's face it, there will be projects, there will be times where you have to have the physical presence of people in the office. So I think that would be it.
Yeah, I think, and I think what I guess we're learning from members and companies is really kind of looking at processes, scrutinizing processes, as you say, to understand which ones are necessary. Clearly, there's a lot of process digitization and automation happening in organizations everywhere anyway. But as you say, really scrutinizing to see what elements perhaps you can do remotely. And I think, yes, you're right. The telephone is a very good example. And that wasn't so long ago that we used to think like that, was it? So
yeah.
So a couple of things have changed. Just to kind of go back, so I've got a couple of questions and from Chris Daniels. So is there, and he asked about, is there a decide your own holiday idea? So some companies allow anyone to take any amount of holiday, but what has happened in a lot of Silicon Valley companies is employees take less holiday as they feel under pressure to be around.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
I think that it's not a great environment to begin with, where people are encouraged to take as much, well, people are empowered to take as much holiday as they want to, but there must be this sort of kind of blaming culture, or this culture of really working super hard, which is not productive and not healthy in the long term. If people in some Silicon Valley companies, for example, effectively take less holiday, I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's good. So for us, currently, we still have a given time that people are supposed to take off, and we actually encourage them to go and take that time off. So I've heard about the syndrome in Silicon Valley companies, and I think it's very unhealthy when people, on one hand, they are supposed to be able to take as much holidays as they want to, but in practice, they take less because there is a pressure to work hard. We might implement that in the future, but at the moment we're focusing on essentially empowering people to take the prescribed amount of holidays every year, and we remind them how much time there is till the end of the financial year, and we try to make it work so people in the same team, for example, there's always someone working. So I definitely have heard about that.
And what's interesting is that you mentioned there that it might be something that you implement in the future. And I think one of the things that's really come across to me is again, just how much iteration and that there is within your culture at Grantry. It's a work in progress. I wonder if you can give us like what have you really learned, or what have been some of the big bumps in the road in developing this culture? Anything that I guess you really had to go through a few rounds of getting right?
Yeah, so my co-founder and I had to learn to let go of control and essentially to distribute power. And that aspects of that were hard at the beginning because you want to keep everything under control as a founder. But then we learned that we're so much more powerful as a company if the power is distributed across several people or even the whole company, as is the case with Holacracy. So that was an important aspect of us preparing for having the culture that we have today. And also recruiting the right people. So we make it abundantly clear what kind of company we are, and we talk to our candidates a lot about whether or not this is the kind of culture where they see themselves working. And also we have a kind of culture suitability test, which we interview all our candidates according to a framework devised by Robert Keegan, which is all to do with adult development stages. So we essentially interview people to find out if they will be a good fit for being able to manage themselves. So there are no managers in our company. So being able to manage themselves, being able to make complex decisions, being able to wear a few different hats. So recruitment is absolutely crucial, the right type of recruitment to recruit the right type of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that this environment, even if some of what happens at Grantry and some of the cultural elements, I think, will going forward be more prevalent in more organizations.
Yes.
I think that there certainly will be struggles for some people to adopt that. And is information, another sort of question came through about how you operate and the governance philosophy available?
Sorry, what's the question?
Is information about your operation, sort of how you operate, and I guess the governance philosophy, is that available? Is that something that you put available on your site? I don't know if other organizations want to see that, or whether anyone else listening could learn more.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have talked and have thought about making, for example, all our salaries publicly transparent. We haven't done that yet. We have also toyed with the idea of making our governance transparent. Again, at the moment it's transparent only internally, not externally. But we do have people contacting us who just want to learn how the company works, and who are writing articles or doing research studies. So feel free to talk to us more if there's anything that what we do that you would like to implement. It's a joy to know that more founders are starting to think along those lines.
Absolutely, and I think founders and as you say, teams within organisations may be looking to do something a bit different. And would you say that then? Would you recommend open culture as a way to, I don't know, drive innovation, boost innovation, strengthen innovation practices? Would you recommend that?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think culture is the backbone of innovation, and how much and how quickly you're able to evolve as a company.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for talking us through all of that. It's been really fascinating to learn about Grantry. As I mentioned, I was really excited when we spoke a couple of years ago about open culture, and fantastic to see it in practice, and also that it has evolved over time, which I think is so critical for people to understand. It's perhaps not a quick solution to issues. That said, Paulina, clearly there are quite a lot of questions that have come through. There's a few more about salaries, which we didn't touch on, particularly about, how do you decide a CEO salary, that kind of thing, and what's the best way to get in touch with you? And also, your book is coming out as well. We've had a question on what your book is about, so maybe you could sort of end with that and.
Yeah, for sure. So in order to get in touch with Grantry, and as you mentioned, we work with technology companies to get government funding for them in the form of R&D tax credits and R&D grants. So there, I would say team@grantry.co.uk is the right email to kind of reach out to us, also about culture-related issues. And for me, my website is paulinatenner.com. And the book that's coming out is actually related to culture and all these concepts that we discussed today. It's called Laid Bare: What the Business Leader Learned from a Stripper. So I used to be also a burlesque dancer, so I kind of married the two identities, and I talk about how they interact in my life and what working as a burlesque dancer, how it inspired me to create changes in my business persona as well. So in order to stay in touch about that, if you go to my website, paulinatenner.com, and sign up for updates, you'll stay on top of when the book is coming out, which is next year.
Fantastic. Paulina, thank you very much. Clearly a lot going on, and we wish you every success with that.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.